Welcome home! This bike is definitely home. Did I mention this bike rips? Hey, do you want to hear what a fork lock sounds like? Going off in your bar bag? How many people has this happened to? Let's turn this damn thing off. This thing is screaming down the highway, man. It's crazy that I could hear that over this bike. Look at that beautiful, beautiful New York sunset. Okay, onward. But yeah, he saw how much it meant to me to be on this bike, and long story short, he was kicking around the idea of selling either this bike or his Purple Haze for quite a while, but he just couldn't stand to let one of them go. And I know the feeling because I felt that way with the 06. You know, when you put your heart and soul into a bike, it's not easy to just let it go like that, you know? I know how it is. So he had thrown around the idea, but you know, every time he got close to selling one of those bikes, he never did it. And then him seeing that video of me and just seeing how much enjoyment I got on the bike, basically he called me up and was like, "Hey kid, you know, you really like that bike, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah, I really like that bike." And he was just like, "How would you feel about being the new owner of that bike?" And honestly, man, I thought he was joking. But then it became very clear that no, this was not a joke. He was legitimately offering me a legendary New York Fxdx build at a price that I could afford, you know? It was a really good price. And again, you know, I had just sold the 06, so I had the funds to make it happen. So yeah, you know, I wasn't in the market for a new bike, but this bike was just one that I 100% could not say no to when the opportunity presented itself. And you kind of heard it in the video. He was basically like, yeah, at the end of the day, I didn't want to let it go, but if I was gonna if I had to let it go to anyone, you were the one I'd let it go to. You know, because he kind of knew I was gonna ride this bike properly, I was gonna put good miles on it, I was gonna respect it first and foremost. You know, I'm not trying to wheelie this thing or loop it out. This is a part of New York City, Brooklyn history. You know, he kind of just passed the torch to me, and that's it. I'm going to do this bike justice and rip around the streets of Brooklyn. But it meant a lot to me, you know, it meant a lot to me that he wouldn't let this bike go to anyone but a select few, and the fact that I made that cut, you know. So that's really it, you know. I did not plan on getting another bike. You know, this was not part of the plan. This kind of just came my way, and it was an opportunity that was too good to be true, and I didn't pass it down. And honestly, that's kind of how it is with this bike life. You know, if you're in it for the long haul and you're not someone that just bought a bike for maybe 1 or 2 seasons and went on to something else, but you're really in this thing for the long haul, the opportunities and the dream bikes are gonna come your way if you are patient, if you work hard enough, and you are disciplined. You might just find someday you get what you want. Because again, it was the same thing with the 06. I wasn't in the market for a bike, But that opportunity just came, and it was too good to be true, and you know, jumped on it. Never looked back. That bike was amazing from day one to the last ride. So it's like not impossible to get your dream bike if there's any moral of this video. You know, I would just admire these bikes for so many years. They influenced multiple of my bike builds, from my Lowrider S to my 06 to my FXR. And here we are. I'm finding myself on one right now, and the most beautiful thing about it is there's literally nothing I have to do to this bike. It is 100% dialed in every way for my size, because myself and Peter are the same height, and also my riding style, because, you know, we have a very similar riding style. He's definitely been a huge influence on how I ride and the bikes that I ride. And honestly, even if that wasn't the case, I still wouldn't really touch many things on this bike anyway, just because, like I said, I do believe that this bike, as well as most of Peter's bikes, are a part of New York City bike history and legacy. So there's nothing I really want to do to this bike. You know, the only thing I think I'm going to do is, and again, I didn't want to do this, I really didn't want to do this, but I definitely am going to throw a crash bar on here, just because this is the only paint job that Ogre did that's on the East Coast. And again, if I could prevent this paint getting dented or scratched from a bike drop, because they do happen, you know, like I'm telling you that this is my dream bike and everything, but that also doesn't mean I'm gonna baby this bike. Best believe I'm gonna ride this bike hard. And that means there's times where I'm riding off-road. There's times where I find myself in sketchy situations. So bike drops do happen, accidents do happen. But it's like with this bike, when the accident does happen, or the bike drop does happen, I want to at least know that I took some proper precautions to preserve the paint on this bike. Because this isn't like your gloss black, right? This, again, is a very unique paint job that you do not see on the East Coast very often. And I absolutely love the paint job, man. Specifically, I love that it's like super California on the tank and the fenders, but then once you get to the fairing, it's 100% New York with that New York flame job. There's nothing more New York than flames, man, and Peter definitely achieved this bike having New York character with that flame job, as well as the Bushwick lettering on the fender. But then it's cool because it's got that West Coast flair to it. So yeah, I'm definitely in love with the paint on this bike. It's very unique, just like most of Peter's builds. But yeah, that's really it. You know, the only thing I can really think of doing to this thing is a crash bar. I might throw some different pegs on here. But that's really about it. In terms of the engine work, you all saw this bike has no problem at all going fast. Suspension's fine, the fairing's fine, the bars are amazing. As you heard in the video, Peter asked me to leave these engravings on here. That's kind of like the blessing of the bike. Those of you who are familiar with the bike bell, to me that's kind of like that for this bike, so don't send me any bells. I don't need them for this bike. But that's it. This is my new bike. And I know what you're probably saying. It's like, well, you sold your other Dyna because you had the problem of one bike sitting between a Lowrider S, an FXR, and another Dyna. Well, I'm going to play this one a little bit differently. And basically, in terms of what I plan to do, is all of my miles that are within the tri-state area, I'm going to be doing on my FXR or this bike. if I'm touring and I'm really crushing miles, which you know is a big part of how I ride, that's when I'm going to start using the Lowrider S. So I'll keep my Lowrider S on reserve for when I'm touring, which is pretty good because it's definitely getting up there in miles. And that'll be good because then, you know, when I do want to really put that bike to the test, you know, I won't be using it as a main bike. It'll kind of be on reserve. Whereas I could put most of my miles that I do during the season on this bike and the FXR, which will be more than happy to handle that type of mileage. Honestly, there's a part of me that also kind of wants to take this bike to Sturgis. You know, you all know with this exact setup that's on this bike, I did my first cross-country trip on a Lowrider S set up the same exact way. So I know I can do it. Welcome home! This bike is definitely home. As we enter Bushwick. As the Bushwick bike enters Bushwick. Oh man, do I love this bike. Do I love this bike, man. Absolutely unreal. But yeah, that's kind of the story behind this bike. That's how we got here. Again, I found myself in front of a really good opportunity, and like the 06 that came before, when I see a good opportunity, I like to take it. And again, you'll know when it's right. You'll know when it's right. And you know, back 3 years ago with the 06, it was right, and I knew it. And now, present day with this bike, it was 100% right, and I knew it. And now I'm just very, very happy on this bike. And it's funny too, because when you ride this bike, you know, it's just such a high profile bike with the paint job. It turns all sorts of heads, man. Like, people are breaking their necks over this bike and the paint job, whether they ride or they don't ride. And I love it, man. And I mean, the last thing as we're starting to close this video out is it's just kind of weird how over a year ago I was riding with Peter. You know, he was on this bike, I was on my Lowrider, and I remember I had just come out with the Stay Low decals, which if you want one of those, you know, just let me know. We definitely have more of those available. But you know, I had to give him one, and he put it on this bike. And I remember just feeling so honored that he would rock a Stay Low decal on, you know, such a magnificent bike such as this one. And now it's just funny because it came back around to me. You know, somehow I put a small mark of myself and my riding style on this bike, and a year later, it's now my bike. It's crazy, man. The universe and the world works in really, really strange and mysterious ways. But I'm going to try to have this video out and dropped by around Christmas. And let's just say that Santa Claus has been really good to Fxdx Brooklyn this year. I don't know how I made it on the nice list, but I guess I must have been especially nice this year with all my PMA. But like I said, if there's anything to say about what you're watching right now, you are looking over the bars of a 100% satisfied and ecstatic rider right now. Many years in the Dyna and FXR game, and I feel like I'm just as happy as when I sat on my Lowrider S. And you know, and the thing to also know, you know, when I did get the 06, right, is yes, the opportunity kind of fell in my lap, but I had always told myself, you know, I had my Lowrider S, so I always told myself that if I was ever going to get another bike, it would be an Fxdx. You know, that was the other bike I would have liked. I knew I loved Dynas. You know, I knew the Dyna frame was the perfect one for me. And man, one thing we love about New York City is when these lights start to come up. Happy holidays, y'all. I hope everyone is having a good holiday. Yeah, so I always told myself that if I were ever going to get another bike, it would be an Fxdx. And then what had happened is the 06 came along with a 116 S&S engine, and I just could not say no to that. And no, you know, that wasn't the particular frame and bike I'd always wanted, but just the deal with that engine was just too good to pass up, and then I found myself with that bike. But I think there was kind of always a part of me when I was on my 06 that kind of wished that even with that endless power, and even with, you know, how many good rides I had on that bike, there was always a part of me that secretly wanted an FXDX. And that's it. I was patient, and I waited for the right opportunity, and this is it. It kind of fell in my lap, and I am incredibly grateful, incredibly honored, incredibly thankful to be on this bike right now. So again, major shout out to Peter Guns for trusting me and deeming me worthy to carry on the torch of the Bushwick FXDX. And I'm sure you've heard him say this before, but the other strange coincidence about this bike is this bike also started off with a 116 S&S in it as well. So the same exact engine. Dude, that, hell yeah. See, that's what I'm talking about with this bike. All of a sudden, everyone in Brooklyn is nice to you when they see this bike. That's that PMA, man. This bike's definitely got it. But yeah, I guess the last thing is this bike also originally had the 116 S&S engine, the same one that I had in the 06. So it's just weird that both myself and Peter kind of went through the giant S&S engine phase, only to cycle back on the bike that I originally wanted with a more... Dude, look at this dude. Now that's Bushwick. If I could get a picture of that dude on this bike. But yeah, it's just crazy to wind up back on this bike, back on the bike that I originally wanted, with a hot-rodded 88-inch engine. Because again, I've said it before, you know, I've said it in my videos, but the 116 I loved, you know, and I ripped on that thing. But at the end of the day, I could honestly say it was too much for Brooklyn, and it was too much for the riding I was doing. So this bike is a little bit more realistic. But that's it. I'm glad you all got to come on the first ride with me in this bike as the new owner. I'm glad you all are with me during the high points and the low points of my motorcycle career. This is 100% one of the high points. And on that, stay safe, stay low. Ride FXRs, ride FXDXs. It just matters that you ride. And on that, FXDLS Brooklyn is out.